I think we should. All right, all good to go now. Just welcoming Josephine Moon to our group today. Thanks everyone who joins in and watches us. So for those that don't know, Josephine wrote The Jam Queens, which has recently been released. And anyone who's watching today who asks a question, thanks to Penguin, I've got a copy of The Jam Queens to give away to somebody. So please post questions in the comments. Just a little bit about Josephine. So Josephine was born and raised in Brisbane. She had a false start in environmental science before completing a Bachelor of Arts in Communication and then a postgraduate degree in education. 12 years and 10 manuscripts later, her first novel, The Tea Chest, was picked up for publication and then shortlisted for an ABIA award. Her best-selling contemporary fiction is published internationally, and her books include The Tea Chest, The Chocolate Promise, The Beekeeper's Secret, 3 Gold Coins, The Gift of Life, and The Cake Maker's Wish. So that's, yeah, a pretty impressive list of achievements, and I'm quite interested in the 12 manuscripts before you had your first book published. That's quite a big effort.
Yeah, it was 10 manuscripts in 12
10,
years.
Sorry.
10. Enough, yes. Yeah, I think I was writing in a lot of different genres at the time. So I was writing non-fiction, I was writing fiction, I was writing children's, I was writing memoir, I was writing YA. I was all over the shop. And I think it just took me a really long time to work out what sort of writer I was, to really just find my voice and to find what story I wanted to tell. And as soon as I settled on The Tea Chest, it all just came together really quickly.
Yeah, because ever since then, it's been very successful for you.
Yeah, I'm glad some of the earlier things were not picked up. Because a few of them got, quite close and were shortlisted for awards and things. And at the time, it felt really devastating. But now I think, I'm so glad they weren't published or picked up, because they're not really reflective of where I was going from there. So, yeah, it was good. It was good timing.
So you've never thought of going back to any and trying to fix them up, or?
I don't think any of them are really worthy of publication. I did have a YA book that I wrote that probably had some good potential in it. But what actually happened was when I was writing The Chocolate Promise, so it was a YA book, and it was set in the radio circuit in the 1950s in Australia. And so I had teenage radio writers, and one of those, Lulu Devine, actually just walked into The Chocolate Promise as I was writing it. So she came in as, like a 70, 80-year-old woman. And it was really, it was really amazing to see her come in. And it was sort of like, I never really expected this is the way your life was going to turn out. But it was really, it was amazing. It was really enjoyable.
Yeah. And do you want to tell us a little bit about the Jam Queens?
I certainly will. So the Jam Queens is set in Australia, and it follows 4 generations of women in the one family who are all competitive jam makers. And our main character is Aggie, who's 45. Her daughter Holly is in her late 20s. Her mum's just turned 70, or is turning 70, which is why they've all decided to go on with the GAN. And then we've got Aggie's kind of second mum, who is great Aunt Myrtle. She's in her early 80s, and Myrtle's best friend Dolls, his lifelong bestie, and they're good travellers. They travel everywhere, all around the world. So they all go on the GAN. There's a lot going on in this book, but the GAN certainly takes up, a good 50% of the book. And it's a great opportunity for them, because all of them at the beginning of the book are sort of in a place of being quite stuck in their life. And so the GAN becomes this very physical journey across the country, but also quite a metaphorical one, where they move from this place of being stuck to a place of renewed life and reinventing themselves. So they're all reinventing themselves at every age. And of course they take their literal baggage and their emotional baggage onto the train, and it all gets unpacked, throughout the train journey as well. And of course, we've got jam kind of bookending it at the beginning and the end, and sprinkled through there with some jam martinis, and bits of jam sort of flashbacks and things, and everyone's got their own personal journey going on. So there's a lot going on, but it's a family drama at its heart.
Mm.
wrapped up in my subgenre of foodie lit and foodie fiction. And yeah, it's a really warm-hearted, it's a warm-hearted family story, really.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's a great summary of it all. Yeah, and I really liked the intergenerational relationships in the book. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
well, that's
enjoyed
really
that.
fun. And I think to begin with, it was sort of Aggie's story, but then I just fell in love with all of her family so much
Mm,
that they all just became such really strong voices of their own. And it's just a really lovely thing to explore a family from the inside out. So Aggie's kind of in
mm,
the middle, and so you're sort of
mm,
looking down the line and up the line, and then further on, and it's sort of, yeah, it's just a really interesting thing. I find it really interesting to see how characters are formed not just by their parents but by their parents as well,
mm,
and by other family members, and how that creates characters. So it was really good. And it was one of the things I really enjoyed about this book, actually, was that in terms of the pace of the whole book, it was slowed right down in terms of a timeline compared to a lot
mm.
of my other books, which might have happened over many months. This sort of happens over, just a handful of weeks,
Yeah,
and literally
yeah.
50% of the book is
Mm,
over that sort of week, really, from Darwin down to Adelaide. And so
mm,
it was a really different experience to slow that pace right down and have them on a train where they couldn't get away from each other and they
mm.
couldn't escape with Wi-Fi or anything else, and just they had to talk. And so there was just lots and lots and lots of talking, and it really made me go quite deeply into their sort of their mind space, I guess.
Mm,
Yeah, which I really enjoyed.
mm. And we've got quite a few people watching already, which is great. And
Hi,
I've got some
I can't
questions.
see you, but hi.
Got some questions and comments coming through. So Amber says she's about 70% through the Jam Queens and it's absolutely wonderful. And Aggie's story is heartbreaking but touching and warming at the same time.
Thank you so much. Yes, somebody quoted it the other, or gave a quote the other day that said it was equally heartbreaking and heart-warming at the same time,
Mm,
which I thought was really lovely. It is, I
mm,
hope, and hopefully it has come across balanced that way.
mm,
So thank you.
mm. And Kelly says she loves your books. They're so easy to read.
Excellent. That's what we like. We like to be able to just sink into
Mm,
the book and not get distracted or pulled out of there by things you can't follow. So that's
mm.
good.
And we've got a few people asking about the food theme. So most of your books, or do they all have a food theme in your books?
Yes. So
Yeah.
I call so they're all contemporary fiction,
Mm,
and which just means they're set in the present day. And then I have what I call a subgenre of foodie lit or foodie fiction. So the food for me becomes a real character in the book, and it becomes a real driver of the plot. And it was something that I started with my first book, The Tea Chest, and then I
mm,
just had so much fun researching the tea and playing with the tea, and the tea became such a driver of the whole story that I just really wanted to continue that. And it's sort of been the point of difference with my books the whole way through,
mm,
is that that's very much my brand. It's really what readers sort of know me as, that, and really love that and come back for it. So
mm,
it's good fun. And I mean,
mm.
honestly, I just have to do so much research, so I have to eat a lot of food, and that's not a bad thing.
Yeah. And
Except for the
Anne's
chocolate
wondering,
book. The
and
chocolate book was a bit
yeah,
tricky
the
because
chocolate.
I put in a lot of weight that year, eating a lot of chocolate.
Yeah. And Anne's wondering if you make jam yourself.
Yeah, so I had never made jam
Oh,
before
okay, wow. And
researching
then
this book, but I had to, because I call myself a method writer. So whatever my characters are doing, I have to be able to do that as well. So I taught myself to make jam off the internet,
mm,
and found some really good tips from I literally Googled for jam queens, and because I wanted to know what they had to say. And there was one great jam queen down the Bega area who gave a lot of really good advice. And
mm,
so I thought, great, I'm going to follow all of her advice. And then because my jam makers are competitive jam makers, I had to put it into a top tier show, which is, for me, is the Royal Brisbane show. And so, yeah, I made 4 batches of strawberry jam, and then I put the last lot into the Royal Brisbane show, and it won
Oh,
first
wow.
prize,
Congratulations.
which was pretty.
That's
I'm not
pretty
going to say it's
amazing
anything other.
for your
What
first
was that?
time. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I'm not going to say it's anything other than than beginner's luck, because it totally was, but it was also really, really exciting. And I think I'm a bit hooked on that now.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Although at the same time, if you're going to start with a blue ribbon, I kind of go, well, there's only one way, and that's down, really.
Yeah,
So I should
exactly.
probably
What's
quit while I'm
next?
ahead.
Kelly's wondering if she hasn't read any of your books before, do you have one that you would recommend for people to read first?
Oh, jump in anywhere, I say. It just kind of depends. Obviously, I want you to read The Jam Queens, because this, of course, is my favourite baby right now. But, if you have a love of a particular food, that's a great place to start, because you'll enjoy it from the food perspective. And some of them are set between Australia and overseas, and some of them are set solely in Australia. So, if you're looking for a bit of armchair travel, then, this one's a good one to travel through Australia. But the other, really good one is Cake Maker's Wish, which goes to the Cotswolds. 3 Gold Coins, which I actually do have, just sitting there. It's actually just popping something up. 3 Gold Coins is set in Tuscany, in Italy. And the tea chest is halfway between Brisbane and London as well. So there's a few options there based on food and travel.
Yeah, and Sina's question has a lot to do with what you just said as well. So she's wondering if you traveled to those places to research your books, and I'm also wondering if you went on the Garn.
Yeah, so for the tea chest was set partly in London. I had been to London, but not for about 10 years. But yes, I had been there previously, and I also had a good friend who'd lived there for 10 odd years. And so she, vetted all my London stuff for me as well. And through the Chocolate Promise as well, my character goes to Paris and Provence. I'd been to Paris, but I hadn't been to Provence, but I did a lot of research on that one. And again, my friend just happened to be going to Provence, to the very town that my scenes were set in. So I actually printed off all the draft that I had at the time and sent them with her on the plane and said, can you please get there and read all this and make sure it's all accurate? So that was great. And then, I went to Italy on writing retreat because I was feeling really blocked. And so I did as any good author would do. I jumped on a plane and went overseas. And so then all of that research went into 3 Gold Coins. And then, I went to the Cotswolds with my dad, my sister, and my sister's, I think he was 9-month-old baby at that point. And we went on a family trip to the Cotswolds, stayed in a little village in the Cotswolds for a couple of weeks. And then all of that research sort of sparked the Cake Maker's Wish as well. So it's one of the really great perks about being an author is you get to go on these amazing research trips and claim them as tax deduction. It's awesome.
And Belinda's wondering.
Sorry, I didn't answer your last question. Did I go on the GAN? I absolutely
the GAN,
yeah. It was wonderful. This is a photo of me and my sister. I took my sister with me.
Oh, nice.
I always managed to convince her to come with me everywhere I go, and that's the obligatory photo you take at the beginning with the big logo at the front there. And yeah, it's wonderful. We had an absolute ball. It was great.
Belinda's wondering if you have a favourite recipe that you could share with us.
Oh, favourite recipe. Are we talking sweet or savoury? Look, what I can tell you is that on my website, on josephinemoon.com, I have a page on there, tab of recipes, and it's a lot of the recipes that appear through all my books, and they're listed by the book. So if you have read one of the books and you loved the biscuits in it or the cake or whatever, those recipes are on my site. So the blue ribbon winning recipe for the jam is in the back of this book. And then I had a second place win on a Persian love cake, and the recipe for that one is in the back of the Cake Maker's Wish. And then there's a few other things on there. So yeah, I went through a few months ago and sort of sourced all these recipes I had floating around on my website and collated them all.
Oh, God.
Quite a lot there. I thought I should probably put them together in a bit of an ebook or something and put them out.
Yeah, no, that's good. I'll have to check them out.
Are you a baker?
Not really, but I'm always willing to give something a go.
Why not? Why not?
Patricia's wondering if you have a strict writing schedule and a special place to write.
Yeah, I do now. It took me about 8 years to get a grown-up writing room, which is where I am sitting at the moment. And the final thing that kind of kicked it over into being a grown-up room was actually COVID last year, because all the tours and everything were cancelled, and sort of overnight everything went online. And so I suddenly realised that my room was about to become a bit of a studio. So I painted a feature wall behind me, which is behind that screen at the moment, and painted my desk and made it all really pretty. And there's a chandelier above me up there, which I just like, because I think, you can't ever have enough chandeliers, I don't reckon. And so I have a grown-up room, but that took me years and years and years to really get one. I was always in pokey little rooms or sharing the room with something else. And it is a real joy to have my own space in here now. Although since COVID, my husband's been at home pretty much, working from home, and he's kind of been sharing my space a bit, but we're now building him his own space out there, so that he can have his man shed and I can have my writing room, and never the twain shall meet. So that's good. As far as routine goes, it's changed kind of every year that I've been writing, because I got my first agent when my son was 6 weeks old.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I had been writing, as for 12 years before that, and it was like this amazingly huge cosmic joke that I, had 12 years of being quite free to do whatever I wanted, and then I had this baby, and all of a sudden I had a 2-book deal, and suddenly I had to be a professional again, and insanely sleep deprived in the whole deal. And we were moving locations. We were moving 2.5 hours away and renovating a house, and it was just insane. So those first kind of 5 years were just really, really nuts and really not great. And it was sort of, I just had to write whenever I could. And it was, it's not ideal. Like, it's really not. It's hard. It's sort of like you're really tired or whatever, and you just sort of have to turn up and do it. So they were harder. Now that he's at school, I have more of a degree of, control over my time. So I'm definitely best first thing in the morning. So normally, get him off to school, have a shower. I try and get dressed now. I used to work in my pajamas a lot, but now I've just found that I have to, as I've gotten older, I just need to get dressed and, look the part a little bit just for myself, and to just tell myself that I'm at work now. And then I probably have that sort of 9 till 1 space that I can work in. And that will be writing, but it will also be doing, websites and emails and social media and creating graphics and all of that extra stuff, and doing bookkeeping and invoices and all of that really boring stuff as well. So, yeah, that's kind of my routine.
Yeah. And had you always thought you would be a writer?
Well, I think I must have had an inkling when I was very young, because I wrote my first book when I was 9, and it was called Starlight the Brumby, which was highly, highly influenced by Elaine Mitchell's The Silver Brumby series, which I was completely addicted to, because I'm a mad horsewoman, and that never left me. And so I wrote that when I was 9, and I don't know, I sort of thought I was going to be a vet, then I sort of thought I was going in environmental science, and then a few things kind of kept not working out. And in that sort of first year of environmental science, I thought I really need to look at maybe where my true strengths are, because they weren't in statistics, which is what ecology requires a lot of, and that was blatantly clear. So I thought, well, I seem to be quite good at writing. So I then switched to journalism and sort of went down the journalism, film and media path. And then I did a postgrad in education and went down the English teaching path. It was in that first year of English teaching that I went to my first workshop with Queensland Writers Centre. And I just had this, what I call like a full body moment that day, where I just went, this is it. I found it. I need to be a career author. That's what I need to do. So I set out doing that, and I just wrote, as you know, for the next 12 years, and eventually got there. Yeah.
And how did you keep yourself going for 12 years and not having a book published?
Yeah, there was a lot of very heartbreaking times in there, absolutely. As anybody who's writing knows, it's a very solitary thing, so you have to kind of take yourself away from your family or your friends or whoever, and lock yourself away to do it. So it's a huge investment of time and energy, and it's a really, like putting a cake in a show or anything else. Like, it's a really hard thing to put something out that people are going to judge, and it's scary and it's nerve-wracking, and you put your whole life and soul and heart into it. So I think the really important thing is that you need at least one good writing buddy. So and in the first few years I had a writing buddy. We would meet every month. We would write a short story every month. We would meet up catch up for coffee or lunch and swap and critique each other's work. And so you need at least one of those. Some people have a whole group. You just need one at least. And I think you need that community to keep you going. And easier now because you have the internet. Like when I was sort of first doing this, it was 1999, 2000, 2001, like the internet was barely around. There was no social media and stuff. So now, of course, there's lots and lots and lots of online support that you could find. But yeah, I think you just have to connect with other writers and keep each other going.
Yeah. And did you have someone who really supported you through that time?
Yeah, I've had definitely some really, really good writing buddies, absolutely, who kept me going. And one of those who's still, helping me today. And my husband, once I met him too, he's always been my biggest fan, my biggest supporter. He absolutely believed in me way more than I ever believed in myself, and was just unwavering. It was just unwavering confidence that it was going to happen. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Patricia's wondering if you choose your own titles.
So the short answer is not always. The longer answer is that every book, because every book takes, the Jam Queens came together over about many years, maybe over 5 years. So they come together in bits and pieces, and so they have a working title along the way. And sometimes I have no idea what that is. I have no idea what the final one's going to be till the end. And sometimes the publisher will sort of know, publishers always know what sort of keywords often sell as well, so they like to weigh in on titles. But very often that doesn't happen, because when I first start writing a book, I have no idea where it's going. Like I have a very rough mud map, like I want to get from here to Cairns, but I don't actually know how I'm going to get there. So I don't really know what's going to happen. And I spend a lot of time rewriting, and I will delete characters, I'll delete whole families, I'll delete whole plot lines, I'll, do all these huge overhauls to them. So they change a lot from sort of first draft to the final book. So yeah, basically, no. I originally called the Jam Queens the Jam Queen. That was actually my singular. Yeah. But by the end, then it went in a few different directions. Then right at the end, my publisher said, "Do you think we can call it the Jam Queens?" And I said, "Well, yeah, we absolutely can, because when you read the book, that phrase actually comes out later in the book, and it makes perfect sense." And it was like, yes, that's absolutely what it was always meant to be. So I was nearly there in the first one. Yeah.
Yeah. And Kelly's wondering if you have a favourite character
in this book.
Well, in any of your books, she's saying.
Any of them. I have, and I say this a lot to a lot of people, if you see me speak will know this, like I have a very soft spot for The Beekeeper's Secret. And mostly because the main character of that book, Maria Lindsay, is a 73-year-old ex-Catholic nun hiding away at the top of a mountain with a very big secret. And she, Maria was just such a strong character. She was such a huge presence. And I was trying to write a whole other book, and she kept trying to work her way into that book. And I had no idea why she was there. And eventually I was sort of like, what is it that you want? And it was really clear that she wanted her own story. And every time I sat at the computer, she was just there. She just had so much to say. So from that perspective, I have a real soft spot for Maria, because she just turned up as a fully formed character with a lot to say, and was just such an easy voice to, not going to say channel, but connect to, you know. She was really, and that book was the fastest first draft I've ever written, which was about 4 months, which is fast for me. Normally my books take 6-7 months to do a first draft, which is pretty long. If you're on a book a year contract, it's pretty.
And is that what you're normally doing, a book a year?
Yeah, so I've been on book a year contracts, which means you end up working on a few different books all at once at different times. So you'll be writing one, you'll be editing one, you might be researching one, and you'll be promoting one as well. So they all just sort of cross over and shuffle on and off your desk at one time.
And when you start with your book, do you start with a character or with plot, or?
My books always start from what I say the outside in. So I'm a really strong world builder. Building worlds is really important to me. So I have to have my location locked down really well. So that that's why I do a lot of trips, because I want a lot of location research. And so that really comes first, and probably very close behind that comes my food thing. And so I do a lot of research on the food, and that, well, actually, in having said that, probably the food ideas float around first, because I have to start trying to look for locations that would support that food. So, you know, if I was doing wine, and as everyone always says, why don't you do wine? And I'm like, well, because of the research problem, right? I'd have to drink heaps and heaps of wine, which really, it's not going to work out well. So, but if I was doing wine, for example, you'd obviously have to set the book in a wine growing region, right? So you're trying to match those two things together, first of all. And so for me, it's like setting a stage. So once I've sort of got that whole, that whole world kind of locked down, then I can bring characters in and see how they're working out things on the stage, I guess.
Yeah. And Patricia's wondering if you read your reviews.
I have a look really early on, just to get a few quotes that I can share as well. And I mean, often people will post them on socials and tag me, so I generally see them there. But as a rule, I try not to get too deeply into them at all, because it's just better not to have people's voices in my head. It's not even so much what they're saying. I mean, everyone gets bad reviews. That's half of the course. But it's not really that. It's more just having people's voices in your head. Like, I think it's one of the really beautiful things about writing your first book, is that there are no voices in your head, because there's no expectations. And I never expected the tea chest to actually get published. I mean, I've been writing for so long. It was still a dream out there, sure, but I never had any real belief that it would get out there. So that's a really freeing space to write in. The more you write, the more you write, the more you write, the more voices start entering your head, and that becomes a problem. That becomes a real seed of self-doubt.
Yeah. And I'm interested to know what sort of books you like reading yourself, and maybe is there something that you've read lately you want to recommend to us?
Yeah, so I am a very slow reader, which is quite problematic when you're an author, because everyone sends you all these books, which is great, and I love supporting people's books, and I love stories, and I love any good story well told, I won't read crime. I won't read any. It's probably easy to say what I won't read. I won't read crime. I won't read anything really scary. I won't read anything violent. And I have a pretty low tolerance for trauma-based stories. So anything like that is just, I can't deal with it. I'm too sensitive, and I just take on too much stuff. So that cuts out a lot of that. So I read a lot in this genre. Obviously, this is why I write in this genre, because it's what I read. It's what I love. I do read a lot of nonfiction as well, though, because I find that's I'm really interested in it. I'm really interested in the world and the way the world works and people's stories. And it's often a really good place to mine potential stories as well, like just to get new ideas, fresh ideas about, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder how, if we took that and put it over there, how that would play out in that situation. So do a lot of that. And I have a young child, so I read an awful lot of children's books as well, because we read in bed every night. So we get through, hundreds and hundreds of children's books. But at the moment, I'm just finishing Ali Sinclair's book, The Codebreakers. I have just started All We Have Is Now by Kanina May. I'm doing that on audio. I read almost exclusively on audio as well. And then I'm about to start Rachel Johns' book, How to Mend a Broken Heart.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thanks for those. Kelly's wondering if you ever reread your own books after they've been published.
I don't reread them, but I love listening to them on audio. The reason I love listening to them is because the narrator always just presents the book slightly differently. Like, so it sounds different than it sounded in my head. Like, they'll emphasize different words, or they'll go faster over sections or slower over sections, than in my head it was the other way around. And so it actually feels a lot like listening to a new story, even though I kind of know what's going to happen. I'm still really engaged with it, because the characters sound different, and it just feels really fresh and alive. And it's really when I just listened to this one, which was narrated by Kat Stewart, which I say over and over again because I love Kat and I wanted her to do it. There was some stuff in there that I just went, wow, like I can actually hear that completely differently than it was in my head, and I can see that character in a completely different way than I did when I was even writing that character. It's a really bizarre thing. It's really, I love it. It's really fun.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. And do you get a choice in who reads your books?
I didn't for the first 4, and then I was someone said to me, they'd said, what did I like watching and reading? And I said, Offspring was my favourite show, like ever. And absolutely loved Kat Stewart. And then they said, would you like Kat Stewart to do it? Because she said she would do it. And I honestly, I cried. I was so excited and I was so happy. So she read The Gift of Life and it was just brilliant. She wasn't available to do the one after that. And then I asked again, hopefully for this one, and she was available again. So I did for those two, yeah. But it's always great. Whoever reads them, it's always great. But I particularly love Kat.
Holly's wondering if you have any advice for emerging authors.
So without knowing how far along you are in your journey, one of the things I always say is I think far too often people skip the part where you need to write a lot of short stories. So writing short stories is one of the greatest things you can do. And I wrote short stories for years and years and years. And I think they're really great for a few reasons. One, because they're not a huge investment of time, right? So you can write a 2,000 or 3,000 word story in a day if you really want to, but certainly in a week, so it's not a massive investment of time. And you can write across so many different genres and styles and different voices. You can try first person and third person. You can write in fantasy. You can write contemporary. You can do whatever you want. And you haven't wasted much of your time if it all turns out to be rubbish at the end. And the other thing is doing that and testing yourself in different spaces, in different voices and different genres actually helps you build your own voice and find your own voice and find where your voice sits and where it's comfortable and where it's not. So for me, a lot of people just jump straight to, I want to write a novel. And so they start writing a novel. But for me, that's a lot like saying, I'm going to build a house, but I have no idea how to build a cubby house. Like it's, you wouldn't do that. You'd learn some woodwork skills first and you'd build, maybe a chicken coop or something. Like you do a few small things first and build your skills up to get there. Because a novel is such a huge endeavour. And I mean, you'll be in that for years and years and years. And the other thing I would say on the back of that is if you've written your first novel and you're trying to get it published and you're just sort of editing it and sending out, just don't get stuck in it. I've seen lots and lots of people get stuck in a book because they're like, well, it took me 2.5 years to write it, and they're just stuck and they can't move on. You really, really have to just write it, improve it as much as you can, absolutely, and then let it go. Just move on to the next thing and move on, because 2 other books down the track, you'll look back and go, yeah, that actually wasn't good. It's very, very rare for anyone to get their first book published. So you sort of have to do your scholarship, you have to get through the bad stuff to get to the good stuff.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Kelly says she loves the food themes and she's wondering what your ultimate food indulgence is.
Oh, it's cheese.
Okay.
I'm an absolute cheese tragic. It's not good for me, I have to say, cheese. It doesn't agree with my belly very well, but I just love it. And I started writing a cheese book, but it became 3 gold coins because it was over in Italy. And once you're in Italy, it's just like, oh man, there's just food everywhere and it's all amazing. And there's still a lot of cheese in it, but it just sort of became much broader than the cheese. I might go back and do some more cheese later just so I can
so you can try some more out.
Definitely cheese. Yeah. Definitely. I could give up chocolate. Like if someone said you've got to give up chocolate, I could do it. But if someone said you've got to give up cheese forever, there would be tears.
And quite a few people are wondering what you're working on at the moment.
I am actually having a little break because I've put out 9 books in 8 years and I'm a little bit tired, and I've also had quite bad tendonitis in both my elbows for the past 2 years that have made it really hard to type and finish books on time. So I'm having a little bit of a break to rebuild my elbows, hopefully, and get my creative well refilled again, and then during that time I'll be looking out for, the next thing that wants to be written.
Yeah. And what have you been doing in your break?
I'm not actually I'm on a break from typing, but I'm doing publicity and stuff at the moment, so I'm still sort of working. But other than that, I've just enrolled in yoga teacher training, and I'm going to do some yoga teacher training for the rest of the year. And hopefully that'll give me some help rebuild my elbows and stuff as well.
And sorry, I've just lost where I am at the moment. Could you tell us, for you, what makes a good story?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess you've got to have, you have to have an engaging premise, right? So you've got to have something that's set up at the beginning that's like, all right, here's our problem that needs to be solved by the end of this book. And you've got to be on board enough with that premise to follow it through. So I think you've also got to have really engaging, interesting characters, and they just have to have really clear, distinct personalities, I think, because it's personalities of the characters that really keep you listening to find out what they're going to do next.
And talking about your characters, I'm interested to know how you get your characters' names. Do you use any names of people you use, or try to totally steer clear of that?
Yeah, names are tricky. I find names very tricky. So, obviously you sort of look at, to begin with, I don't really know who my characters are, so often they change names a few times early on, because as I start to get to know them, I realise that name really doesn't suit them, or something else comes into play. And so obviously there's a lot of things that you would sort of use as boundaries, right? So, obviously if they're English, or if they're Indian, or if they're whatever, that's going to define to some extent, but also how old they are, right? So there are certain names that are just very now young modern names versus sort of older vintage names, and then there are other names that sort of just last forever. Sometimes I get really into looking at the meaning of names, and if I have a particular character that I feel needs a really powerful name or needs a bit of courage or whatever, then I might go looking for that sort of name. I have named a lot of characters after my animals, because I have a lot of animals. So if anyone has read The Chocolate Promise, Lincoln Van Luke, the hero of that story, he's named after my horse, Lincoln. He's a very, very handsome, dark, handsome man who is a bit of a ladies' man, so he got a mention in The Chocolate Promise. So, yeah, but not after people, really. Actually, I've used a few of my nephews' names in there along the way as well. But otherwise, yeah, I just sort of look. I sort of go, I feel like maybe this is an L name, and so I'll just go looking through L names until one feels right or sounds right or something like that.
And have you sometimes had to, when the editors looked at it, you've had to go back and completely change someone's name if they...
And very, very often, and it's completely subconscious, and I don't know how it happens, but very often you'll get strings of names through a book that might all start with M, or they might all start with L. You don't even know they're there, and then an editor will go, do you realise you've got 4, 5 characters? And they might be sub-characters or whatever, but they're sort of peppered through there, and they've all start with it, and you're like, no. And then you sort of have to go back and, substitute some in and out. Yeah.
Before we finish off, just reminding people, if you've got any more questions, please type them in comments and you have a chance to win a copy of the Jam Queens. Could you tell us, Josephine, how people can keep in touch with what's going on with your writing?
Absolutely. So my website's josephinemoon.com, and I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. I used to be on Twitter, but I just can't work out Twitter. It doesn't gel with me, so I just cancelled the Twitter. So Instagram, Facebook, and website, and you'll find my email details and everything on my website as well.
And if a reader, sends out a message to you, do you try and respond to everybody?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. People often message me or email me and say, they're reading the book, they love the book, whatever. I love it. It's great. Yeah. Often their messages turn up at exactly the right time when I'm just like, I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm terrible at this job. And then they're like, oh, your book just changed my whole weekend. And I'm like, okay, that makes me happy.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us. Been great to chat to you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely to be here.
And
thanks to everyone who's come along as
yeah,
well.
thanks everyone, and thanks for the questions. We've had some great questions, which has been good. So bye everybody.
Thank you. See ya.